Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, St. Vincent and the Grenadines welcomes this opportunity to participate in the Universal Periodic Review and to engage in dialogue with members of the international community on the human rights record and accomplishments of the Vincentian people and their successive governments. We consider this interaction to be an indispensable learning experience for both St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the members of the Human Rights Council. From you, we will gain insight into the human rights priorities of the international community and potential areas that may demand our focus or a redoubling of efforts in our continuing quest to improve, protect, and advance the rights of our citizens. From St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you will no doubt gain a greater understanding of the historical, cultural, and social context within which we approach and discuss human rights, a fuller appreciation of the practical constraints facing small governments with limited resources, and a better grasp of the local perspectives, priorities, and deeply held convictions of a sovereign and independent people. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is particularly grateful to the 8 states that have submitted a total of 27 advance questions for our response and reflection. Some of those advance questions will be answered in the course of this opening statement, and we look forward to discussing the remaining questions during the interactive segment of this review. Similarly, we thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the compilations of perspectives from civil society, human rights treaty bodies, and other UN entities that will no doubt inform our discussions today. Mr. President, the development of human rights in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and our national approaches to this broad subject area are informed by our unique combination of historical, physical, political, and socio-economic characteristics. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is an archipelago of over 32 islands and home to roughly 110,000 citizens. Additionally, we are a highly migratory people, with major Vincentian communities living and working in other states, most notably Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. The number of Vincentian citizens living in New York, for example, exceeds that of any city within our own national borders. This Vincentian diaspora, influenced by the perspectives of their adopted homelands, serves to enrich the discussions that take place within our shores. Tangentially, Mr. President, I note one of the illustrious members of our diaspora here today, sitting at the desk of the United States of America, Ambassador King. The small size of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and our islandness, indeed our multi-islandness, conspire to create a society that is open, tolerant, and welcoming of both people and perspectives. These same physical characteristics also engender an independence of spirit and a creativity that helps to craft solutions to problems while catering to our local conditions. The human rights history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is shaped in part by our collective response to 3 abysmal and externally imposed acts of barbarism and exploitation, namely slavery, colonialism, and the genocide of our indigenous peoples. During the 17th and 18th centuries, our country traded hands between the colonial powers of the time, which introduced the savagery of slavery, that most inhumane of human rights violations. The native population of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was systematically exterminated, and the Garifuna people, an admixture of native Amerindians and enslaved Africans who had escaped, fought a lengthy and heroic war against their colonizers. The Garifuna people were eventually defeated in battle, whereupon they were rounded up and exiled to a series of increasingly distant islands that were incapable of sustaining life. When the British finally deposited them almost 2,000 miles away on the shores of Central America, the Garifuna numbered no more than 1/3 of the population that had been expelled from their own country. Today, Joseph Chatoyer, the paramount chief of the Garifuna and leader of the liberation war against the British, is St. Vincent and the Grenadines' sole national hero. In modern times, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has largely solved, and spectacularly so, many of the ethnic and racial tensions that bedevil other states. The descendants of the slaveholder, the enslaved, and the indigenous live in peace and relative harmony with each other, and with the more recent immigrants from Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. To be sure, inequality and its attendant schisms remain an issue. as does an increasingly polarized political culture. However, those problems too are dealt with in a peaceful and open manner. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a plural and fully inclusive participatory democracy. Since independence in 1979, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has enjoyed 8 free and fair elections and 3 peaceful transfers of power between opposing political parties. Today, the country is host to a boisterous free press with 3 weekly and editorially independent newspapers, 10 local radio stations, some of which are highly critical of the government, and a lively and largely unregulated internet blogosphere. Freedom of expression and assembly is constitutionally protected and actively practiced in a variety of contexts. Our elected governments have been similarly inclusive and diverse. The people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines have elected prime ministers of both African and European descent, from the main island of St. Vincent and from the less populated Grenadines. Our current deputy prime minister is a woman, as is our attorney general, many senior judicial officers, and all of the senators in the opposition party. The Minister of Agriculture, one of our most senior members of the government by rank and tenure, is a descendant of the indigenous Garifuna people. Youth representation in Parliament is increasingly commonplace, allowing for the perspectives of parliamentarians in their 20s and early 30s. The Constitution of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was adopted at the time of our independence from the British and has been largely unchanged since then. The Constitution explicitly protects the rights to life, personal liberty, the freedoms of conscience, expression, assembly, association, and movement. The Constitution also provides protection from slavery and forced labor, inhuman treatment, deprivation of property, arbitrary search and entry, discrimination on the grounds of sex, race, place of origin, political opinion, color, or creed, and secures protection of the law, including the right to a fair hearing and the presumption of innocence. Issues that touch and concern constitutional questions are adjudicated by our High Court, which is judicially independent and part of the regional Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Our final appellate court remains the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, located in the United Kingdom. As indicated in our report, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines unsuccessfully attempted to reform the Constitution in 2009 via a referendum. The proposed Constitution was the product of extensive multi-year consultations with all interested stakeholders, citizens, and civil society organizations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in the diaspora. It contained a number of innovations and advancements in governance and human rights, including rights related to employment, political participation, protection of the environment, heritage, and culture. The elderly, youth, women, teachers, and the press also received additional constitutional recognition and protection. The proposed document provided for the creation of a Human Rights Commission and an ombudsman, among other bodies. Unfortunately, the required referendum on the Constitution became a political football as the scheduled 2010 general elections approached. The opposition, which formally supported the constitutional reform effort, withdrew from the bipartisan process, and the discussion of the document took a sharply partisan political tone that made sober and informed debate unexpectedly difficult. The ensuing vote became less a referendum on the Constitution and more an exploratory test run by various entities that sensed an opportunity to test their viability in advance of the general elections, or to grind a wide variety of political axes unrelated to the actual Constitution. On reflection, the state, too, could and should have done more to ensure that the constitutional debate did not become hostage to more short-term political calculations. Nonetheless, the government has fully accepted the results of the referendum and the defeat of its constitutional initiative. Since its December 2010 re-election, the government has begun exploring the feasibility of employing less ambitious or legislatively onerous methods to reintroduce various innovations that were contained in the rejected Constitution. However, many of these innovations will necessarily be subject to a fresh round of consultations and individual scrutiny, lest the government open itself up to the charge of disregarding the will of the people, as expressed in the 2009 referendum. Mr. President, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has the advantage of being the 11th of 14 Caribbean Community member states to participate in the Universal Periodic Review. Having reviewed the presentations of the previous 10 CARICOM member states, we know that the Human Rights Council is now fully aware of the fact that our countries lack the fiscal space and human resources to fully and promptly comply with the often onerous reporting requirements imposed by many of the treaties to which we are a party. We reiterate what our sister CARICOM states have said to this Council, that our regrettable failures to meet some of our reporting requirements in a timely manner is a product of practical constraints, not an absence of political will or a diminished commitment to human rights. As you are now aware, our ministries of legal affairs are heavily burdened with the day-to-day tasks of lawmaking. Small island developing states such as ours not only have tiny staffs and budgets, but also a full plate of forward-looking progressive legislation aimed at national development, regional integration, and addressing urgent and immediate challenges. Within CARICOM and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, we have the additional burdensome constraint of attempting to harmonize many of our laws across the sub-region so as to better facilitate our critical integration processes. However, our preparation for this UPR process has highlighted the fact that St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been inexcusably tardy in meeting some of our reporting commitments over the past 3 decades. One tangible benefit of the UPR is that it has caused the government to revisit the manner in which we prepare for and respond to our treaty commitments. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs now has dedicated legal staff charged with coordinating our national responses in a more systematic manner. The government will form a multi-sectoral committee to review and expedite compliance with our outstanding commitments. Additionally, we will repeat the request that other CARICOM states have made before this Human Rights Council, namely that while we welcome the focus on poor reporting compliance, we would be even more welcoming of an accompanying offer of additional technical and capacity building support in this regard. Mr. President, the manner in which any nation approaches and prioritizes its individual human rights development and improvement is necessarily a product of its own national context and circumstances. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the enhancement of our human rights is not a sterile legislative process occurring in a vacuum. Rather, it is a holistic approach that is responsive to the needs and demands of our citizens. While it is critical that universal human rights are enjoyed universally, it is often necessary for poor countries to prioritize the legislative means by which such rights are formally recognized. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines views its commitment to universal human rights with a seriousness that does not allow for a checklist approach or a cosmetic response to antiquated legislation with little practical applicability. Our legislative stance is more forward-looking and positive, and it is coupled with a respect for the ability of our courts and our common law legal system to shape legal precedent and constitutional interpretation in such a way as to reflect evolving understandings of human rights. The state approaches legislation related to human rights from the perspective that such laws cannot be imposed on people from above or afar. They are crafted by the people's representatives in consultation and communion with their constituents. This is the essence of the democratic process. The adoption and entrenchment of a rights-based culture is not merely a legislative top-down process. It requires an amalgam of overlapping approaches, the engagement of civil society, and an analysis of regional best practices within a conducive environment of public debate. Indeed, public awareness campaigns, frank and open debate, and changing public perceptions often carry these issues well beyond a sterile legislative prescription. Of course, there are times when a state must act and act urgently, particularly in the protection of minority rights that may be under threat. But each brick in the foundation of a rights-based culture must be laid with a care and seriousness befitting the importance of the exercise. Mr. President, human rights are part and parcel of the government's broader developmental thrust and focus. We are aware of the relationship between development and human rights, and view the furtherance of our human rights and rights-based culture as inextricably linked to our continued socio-economic development. Indeed, in this, the 25th anniversary of the Declaration on the Right to Development, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines reiterates its firm belief that development is a human right. We view the establishment and advancement of all universal human rights through this critical developmental prism and our own vigorous pursuit of people-centered development. For example, the universal right to privacy in one's home presupposes the right to housing as a necessary prerequisite. As such, the government has embarked on a national program of constructing hundreds of low-income and no-income homes for Vincentian families with limited means. The right to life is premised in many ways on the right to health and on the assumption that persons will not succumb to easily preventable or treatable ailments. The government has therefore invested heavily in the health sector, building new clinics, delivering potable water to 98% of households, and strengthening our primary care system. The right to work presupposes both a strong economy, capable of absorbing workers, and an educated workforce with the capacity to perform a variety of tasks. The government has therefore focused on these issues, doubling its GDP in the past decade, enabling foreign investment, and launching an education revolution to improve the access to quality schooling. A decade ago, only 39% of eligible students had access to secondary education. Today, there is universal access. The state has also exponentially increased the number of tertiary scholarships and assistance programs available to students based on both need and aptitude. We are also proud of the fact that our policy interventions designed to assist teenage mothers in their return to school has been recognized as a regional best practice by the United Nations Population Fund. Mr. President, St. Vincent and the Grenadines also believes that its measure as a state is also determined by the manner in which we protect the dignity, rights, and well-being of the most needy among us. Our report therefore details a plethora of policy initiatives targeted to our elderly, youth, disadvantaged, and prison populations. While we continue a coordinated war against poverty, we are happy to report that despite a challenging global economy, indigent poverty has been reduced from over 1/4 of the society to less than 3% in the space of a decade. Our national progress towards achievement of the Millennium Development Goals will also have a knock-on effect on the further development of human rights in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. President, notwithstanding our legacy as a distant colonial outpost, as a site of slavery and unimaginable ethnic cleansing, St. Vincent and the Grenadines can reflect with some pride on its rapidly developing and improving post-independence human rights record. Nonetheless, there is significant room for improvement, as many of your advanced questions and the reports of the High Commissioner make clear. Beyond reporting and ratification, there are many tangible areas for new action and consolidation. The right of the disabled to be fully integrated in society still leaves much to be desired, as does the continued stigmatization of persons living with HIV and AIDS, despite concerted efforts by the state in that regard. We remain concerned with violence against women and the sexual abuse of minors. An unwelcome increase in political tribalism and intolerance has spurred the creation of a Ministry of National Reconciliation. Additionally, our capacity to collect and analyze relevant national data must be enhanced in the further development of our human rights architecture. As with all small developing states, we are challenged with allocating the requisite resources, not only to legislate, but also to initiate discussion on complex questions of human rights. In the wake of the global financial meltdown, it is even more challenging to devote resources to anything but the most pressing and immediate demands. Similarly, climate change poses a real and immediate threat to individuals' right to life, property, and development. The long-term threat posed by climate change is existential. Mr. President, I hope that St. Vincent and the Grenadines' deep and abiding commitment to human rights has been properly captured in our national report and reflected in this statement. My delegation looks forward to your questions and recommendations, and we hope that your input will spur further national improvements over the course of the next review cycle. I thank you very much for your attention.